let's talk about a few more new releases. I'm a little late on these, obviously, but they're all coming. There's so many of them. It's just like the floodgates have opened because it's November and we're getting all the award season stuff and some of the bigger stuff and everything that's in between. So let's just go into these and let's start with Black Panther, of course. Wakanda Forever, which is the sequel to the first movie that I really, really love. If you're not a stranger to this channel, you know how I hold the first movie in like extremely high regard and how annoyed I've been over the last 4 years constantly hearing about how overrated it supposedly is, which I don't think at all. I think it earned pretty much all of its praise, and I just love it and have seen it many times, and even feel that way amidst this area of not feeling as strongly about superhero movies as I have been up to this point. Because we were talking before, when I was talking about Black Adam, I was talking about how I wasn't sure how I felt going into this one, because even though I love the first movie so much, I'm finally starting to feel that burnout we were always warned was going to happen. Uh, and it's... Yeah, and it kind of started with, I guess, really just kind of this phase in general, but how I didn't take to Moon Knight the way everybody else did, and then I haven't watched any of the series since Moon Knight, pretty much because of that, because it just kind of drained me that much. And then I liked a half of Multiverse of Madness, and then I didn't like Love and Thunder at all. And top that off with, DC putting out Black Adam and how absolute shit that was, being the worst of these bunch, that I'm just... I don't know if it's the quality of the movies themselves or if I'm just kind of feeling like I'm a little, at least on pause for my excitement for the whole superhero thing. But going into this one of my concerns was, actually no, coming out of this one of my concerns was the fact that we're not, because I'm so behind, I actually saw this a week ago today, actually, and, I realized as I was preparing to do this that I felt like I wasn't, like I was kind of forgetting it already, which was really concerning. So I kind of sat here for a minute and thought about it, and as it comes back to me, I do realize that, I do think overall this is a movie that I like. But the thing about it was, because I hold the first movie in such high regard, and the fact that obviously Chadwick Boseman isn't with us now, my expectations were kind of just non-existent. Because it's like, I could have built it up as like, oh, this is Black Panther 2, and the first Black Panther is amazing, and I love it so much, and set the bar high, but I don't think the bar was ever going to be set that high, between me being kind of fatigued on the superhero thing, and us not having Chadwick Boseman, and the fact that the movie's almost 3 hours. I just kind of didn't really have expectations at all. They were just kind of all left behind. And so, based on that, I do think that I was never going to go into this comparing it to how I felt about the first movie. So I was never coming into this saying, this is going to be, like, off the walls amazing. Like, this is going to be the best thing Marvel's ever done or anything like that. That is not at all how I went into this, despite my feelings for the first movie. So, that probably helped, because I was a little surprised to see that, not... people aren't, like, hating on this and, like, bashing it or ripping it to shreds or anything, but I have noticed a lot of people aren't particularly happy with it. But of course, I was kind of... I take a lot of that with a grain of salt anyway, because so many people are in this camp of, oh, the first movie's so overrated anyway, and they probably just kind of came in with that same mindset. I don't know, I don't really even care to listen to those people. It's not a I think their opinion doesn't matter thing. It's because I do this, I don't really want any outside forces coming in, and also, once I've completely talked about a movie doing it this way, I'm pretty much burned out on that movie, no matter what kind of movie that is. So I just don't really hear other opinions much anymore. So, with that in mind, the opening, obviously, it does feel like it kind of peaks a little bit, and like literally in its opening scene, which obviously isn't the greatest sign, but obviously the first thing they had to address was the fact that T'Challa is not in this movie, and the idea of I really wasn't sure going in how they were gonna do it. Because what I actually did like about this one was the fact that I felt like I went into it pretty blind, which is really, really hard to do with a Marvel movie, because it feels like movies like this, big movies like this, feel like they have no surprises anymore because everything is coming out, and how, like, anytime there's going to be a big movie and there's going to be, like, a big cameo in it or something, or kind of a surprise appearance or something, I feel like you know about this, in quotes, surprise, like, over a year in advance. Because they just are throwing as much information at you as possible. I feel like Endgame was the only one that supposedly didn't do, like, because I don't watch trailers anymore. Supposedly, like, Endgame's trailer only showed, like, all the clips from Endgame's trailer are, like, from the first 20 minutes of that 3-hour movie or something. So that managed to pull it off, but I feel like for the most part, we just get way too much information all the time. Not even just from trailers, just from anything. It's just like everything and everybody's trying to figure everything out and throw all the information out there. So I was surprised that there were some things in this movie that I didn't know were coming, or how they were going to go about doing certain things. So I didn't even know going into this or not that they would confirm a T'Challa death, like a death of the character. So the fact that it starts immediately with that, I do feel like, I do wonder how much, because I know there was the whole debate about whether they were going to recast him or not, and now that they've pretty much cut off that whole thing entirely, how that's going to go, if they should, change their minds later. It's obviously it's too late now, but yeah, I don't mind the recasting, because whoever was going to replace Chadwick Boseman was going to be, it was going to be a very, very uphill climb for that person, and I can't imagine people just saying, like, oh yeah, this fits perfectly. I feel like it was always going to be, at best, they're good, but they're not Boseman. That's the best it probably could have been if they recast him. So it almost feels bold in a way to just sort of say, we're just going to kill off T'Challa entirely, and kind of hand it off to another character. And that's the thing also, is the idea of which character is it going to be handed off to, and that seemed pretty obvious, but I kind of liked going into this not being completely sure, especially with one of the actors themselves in real life being controversial. It kind of felt like, are they going to do the obvious thing, or is it going to... because there's plenty of characters here that are strong enough to sort of take up this mantle enough, whether it be, Shuri or Okoye or Lupita's character, or even Winston Duke, maybe. Angela Bassett obviously would not be another obvious choice. Maybe not the superhero aspect, but the power aspect. But yeah, but as far as killing off the character entirely, I was pretty much on board with the idea just in general, because nobody was going to surpass Boseman, but also the way they handle it in this opening scene, where we get the funeral, and you can tell that it's, the real emotion of the actors and stuff like that during it, and it feels like a real funeral, and how that's kind of, bleeding through the screen practically. That's obviously going to be a very, very strong opening, and it kind of makes sense that you're not going to kind of reach that kind of emotional peak. The only way you're going to reach that kind of emotional peak throughout the movie is whenever you reference T'Challa, and it's maybe not necessarily going to be these characters sort of individually having their own moments that stand out, which could be seen as a weakness, and probably is. But we still have stuff here that works, and not necessarily just on an emotional level. Like, talking about the introduction of the villains here, where we have this genuinely creepy underwater scene, where what I liked about it especially was that when there's that, sense of danger, there's that sort of siren song that's coming out of the darkness because of the characters we're dealing with. And the fact that that creepy sound went on for a long time before I realized it wasn't the score of the movie itself, that it was something from within, like what was going on in this particular scene. And the way that was sort of unveiled, I really liked, and how it was kind of this, it sets up this very dangerous nature to our antagonists, in this very creepy way about them. It doesn't really have that feeling ever again, unfortunately. Once we kind of see the villain, and we get like this, it's the like half the movie is basically the villain's movie, and it's like his origin story, and it's sort of humanizing him in this way. And that's another thing where it's like I can see where that works. I feel like it especially works in this scene, like right in the middle, where we're getting his big backstory and his origin story, and he's here with Shuri, and the way these characters are interacting. What I really like is it was kind of hard to tell if the point of the scene was to humanize him or if it was to show Shuri potentially dancing with the dark side. And it's like, was it kind of which of these characters is going through more of a change as far as the audience's perspective in this moment? And honestly, the fact that at the end of the day, and in retrospect, it kind of feels like it was basically a little bit of both. And I think there's something there, and it's one of those cases also where it's like it really depends on how you feel about Namor, who I guess would be our main villain here. Like how you're going to feel about this movie, because like I said, a very surprising amount of this very long movie is essentially the villain's movie and his backstory and all that. So at least it felt like it was. I wasn't, obviously I couldn't time it or anything, but it felt like it was. But and talking about the other characters that we have here, and as far as them, there being so many of them, and also with half the movie being this thing, the other half kind of dealing with our characters that we know. Like, Letitia Wright is obviously very, very good here. I love the sort of that nature where it feels like she could be dancing with the dark side, where it's like when Bassett and her have the scene talking about, burning the funeral clothes and stuff like that, and she says, where she starts to think about T'Challa, and she says that she doesn't want to burn the clothes, she wants to burn the world to the ground. And, like, taking the character from this angry approach, I feel like is this way of showing grief, but also making the character very interesting and kind of making us feel like we're not quite sure what direction she's going to go, because we come in thinking, well, surely she's going to take up the mantle. So to have this idea of her feeling like she kind of sounds like she could be a villain at any minute is a very interesting way to take that character, and I really love the way Letitia Wright sold that. She's a very, very good actress. And talking about very, very good actresses, we do also have... I do feel like Lupita was really underutilized, unfortunately. Like, I was kind of really looking forward to there being, like for her having has as much to do as Wright does, and that's kind of going on that. Especially with Lupita having been T'Challa's love interest in the first movie. And it's like, well, this does play a part eventually. It feels like it takes a very long time to get there, and I don't know that it's used to its fullest extent. It's certainly not the fullest of Lupita's potential, which we obviously know. But we could have used more of her. We could have used a lot more of Winston Duke. That was kind of disappointing. I was definitely looking forward to seeing a lot more of him. But somebody I do feel like they used very well, both were Bassett and Okoye. Okoye especially, because she's the one where it's like, if there's anybody that feels like they could, take up a superhero mantle, I would like to kind of see her more in the spotlight than she is. But what they choose with her storyline does kind of take her out of the movie for long periods of time. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like, you can kind of feel like the movie doesn't quite completely recover where it started when Okoye goes out of the movie for a while. And then obviously whenever she resurfaces, it's like it feels like something's back. Like there's an energy or an electricity that comes back when she comes back. But there's also the case where I've talked before about specifically about like my worries about people wanting my favorite actress in the world, Emily Blunt, to be a part of the MCU. And my argument to that is always, I don't feel like this is challenging enough for her, and the roles wouldn't be challenging enough for her. And so it's always nice to see them actually let actors act in a really big way, like Downey in some scenes of Endgame, or Bassett here, where they actually get these really big moments that could be anybody's Oscar clip in another movie, in another context. And of course she's Angela Bassett, so of course she's going to sell those. But she's another one like Letitia Wright, where it's like where you're coming from this place of having to take charge of something and have this sort of responsibility, but also coming from this sort of resentful place of having lost somebody you love. But Bassett's especially in a place where she's lost a lot of people. I mean, everybody here, like in this family, of course, has lost a lot of people, but like specifically from her perspective, it's a lot of loss. And for her to have to basically be in control in this moment, and the way that she has this, Bass basically has to control the movie in the same way. There is definitely a lot of weight to those scenes. But once again, like I said, I think the problem is that most of these scenes are early on. So the bar is set pretty high by the movie itself. And then we've got a whole other, basically a whole other movie going on. Because there is the character of Riri, the Dominic Thorne character, who, to my understanding, because I've lost track at this point, is getting, like, you know, one of the spin-off series. And it does feel like that they're kind of setting that up, because it does feel like she's supposed to be a much more crucial character in this than she ends up being. But I did like her, like, I wasn't sure how like, one of the things that's immediately going to make me say, oh, shit, is, when we're about to there's build up to an impending character, and we're about to meet a character that we know is going to be a big deal, and then the reveal is, oh, it's a kid. And it's like there's always just a dreaded feeling when that reveal happens, because like this almost never goes well. There's exceptions, but they are so far apart. Going in with that mentality, I didn't really mind this character. I do think there could have been more as far as the dynamic between the three of them, between Shuri, Okoye, and Riri, but there is a great action scene that comes from this where they're all like, all three of them are using three different modes of transportation. And it does kind of give the vibe of like the better action, like the chase scene in the first movie that was really, really great. Kind of gives vibes of that, only trying to be bigger, but only accomplishing it, you know, a fraction of it as well. But still more or less a good action scene, and it doesn't feel as redundant as a lot of the action scenes do in the MCU lately. But I also like how there's some things here, like when the characters come in, like the villains come in on like the backs of whales, and we see this happen, and then later there's a moment where somebody's describing that this just happened. And it's like it sounds like such a mythical thing. It's like they rode in on the backs of whales and they in the armies and stuff like that. And it's like it sounds like this very mythical thing to the point that you almost forget, oh yeah, we literally just saw that happen, so we know that this is what's actually going on. But yeah, and as far as that brings in the conversation about the effects, which I've been saying the same thing about the Marvel movies' effects for some time now, which is more often than not they're getting a lot of shit for being bad. But I do think that they're not as bad as their reputation leads you, really, because it's pretty much split down the middle. I feel like there's like about 50% of MCU effects that are amazing, and then there's 50% that don't look very shoddy and they look very rushed. There's one point, I think towards the end, at some point when they're in Wakanda, there's a shot of Winston Duke and like his guys behind him, and it's such a green screen shot, and they're just standing there. It's not an action scene or anything. And it looks like they're standing in front of a wall, despite the fact that Wakanda's behind them. And stuff like that, obviously, slips through the cracks somehow. But there's still, you know, effects that do really work, and I feel like those kind of get overshadowed by the one. People only remember, like, the bad stuff. People only notice the bad stuff, too. That's another thing about just CGI in general. As I said, just go watch those videos about how much CGI is in Scorsese movies. You would never know. Because they're so seamless. And it's like, because there's stuff here that you're going to realize is CGI, then it's going to stand out more, and you're going to only remember it as, oh, the movie just has shitty CGI. It's like, yeah, it's got a certain percentage of shitty CGI. It's not fully, completely shitty. Yeah. if they could go the full mile though and put the full effort into the CGI, that obviously would be ideal. I'm not defending the shitty CGI by any means, but I'm just saying let's also acknowledge the good as far as the CGI goes as well, even though there's some shit as well. Um, Another thing I was talking about where it was like not knowing anything about the story really, or how they were going to handle T'Challa in general. There's also a couple of people in this that I didn't know were in this, which is a fucking miracle. Because I imagine most people probably knew that these couple of people were in it. One of them is a character I've been into. They're both characters we've already met, obviously. So it's not like a massive thing. But there is one character that I had been curious since they were introduced in a TV show and then the post-credit scene of a movie, where I was curious exactly what this character's purpose was and whether they were good or bad or where exactly they were in this. And I love the person playing this character. So I do think their scenes, though, do feel like they're not completely necessary. And it's like, I think that's another thing where they're like building up to something else. So there's obviously a lot of that. And then there is another person that I, for obvious reasons, did not expect to see in this movie that's in it. And that was a really nice surprise also, and also talks about the dancing with the dark side aspect of Shuri that I really like. So that's kind of like, I was already having those thoughts, and then to see this person appear where they did and at the time that they did, it felt pretty perfect to me. And I was just, because this person's so good in this role, it was really nice to kind of see them again, even if just for this brief moment, playing this particular part. So, or a version of this particular part, I guess you could say. So, yeah, and of course, we get the big Black Panther moment that we've gotten in, in Endgame and maybe in Infinity War, and obviously definitely in the first movie. There's going to be the sweeping shot of whoever Black Panther is doing the chant with the army behind them. And that's always going to be great, regardless of who Black Panther is in the moment. Like I said, we're always going to miss Boseman in this part, but this is one of those moments where I feel like it's just kind of immortalized regardless of who's in the part, which is great. So, yeah, I do think... another thing I was kind of surprised by is, and maybe help me out here, I was going to say that I kind of like the lack of the humor, because I feel like even the biggest MCU fans will say that a lot of the humorous moments tend to be pretty forced, and not completely necessary, and will sometimes even, botch a scene that was otherwise working dramatically. And I don't really remember much attempts at humor in this, in the way that we know the MCU to do. And the reason I say maybe I can get some help on this is, I don't know if it's because there's just less humor, or if there was a lot of humor and it was so bad I didn't even realize it was humor. That's also equally realistic. So, yeah, but I mean, if they really actually toned it down on purpose, I do greatly appreciate that. And I think really the last thing I have to complain about would be that this movie... We talked before about how this movie is gigantic and very, very long. And the question going in is always, does it warrant this length? We talked about how there's some aspects here that feel like they're just building to stuff that maybe didn't necessarily have to be here. It could have been just put in one of the series or something. The movie also has big Return of the King energy when it comes to the ending. And this is kind of coinciding with the whole, this is stuff you could have put in one of the series or something. Or it's just building up to one of those things. Or multiple things. So, yeah, but when we do finally get to the ending, like the mid-credits scene, I do feel like that works emotionally. I don't know what they're planning on doing with it. I don't really think they need to do much of anything with it. But there's definitely an emotional power to it that I thought really worked. So, I think that's pretty much what I have to say about this one. So yeah, I certainly don't hate it. And I would go as far as to say that I like it. Like, I wasn't sure when I went into this, because I came out of the theater liking it, Then when I realized I was kind of forgetting about it, I was worried. But now that we've come back to it, and I'm talking about the stuff that I do like, the stuff that I do like is standing out a lot more than the stuff that I didn't like. So, this I feel if there's a lot that I disliked, it's probably the stuff that I have since forgotten about. And I feel like I talked quite a bit, which means there was quite a bit that I did like about it. So, that's I feel like where I can stand until I see it again, whenever that is. Because like I said, even though I did, against all odds, like this movie a lot amidst my superhero fatigue, I'm not sure when a rewatch will happen. It's probably not going to be soon, but we will see whenever that time comes how I feel then. But right now, I feel good about it a week out from seeing it. So I feel like that's at least a decent sign. So we'll see. And with where my expectations were going in, I'm pretty satisfied where we are now. And like with just no even thought that this could be at the level of the first one, just right out front, like I said, probably helped a lot. So yeah, so let's go to She Said, the inevitable movie about the whole Weinstein thing. And I did read this book over the summer, and I was really it's a whole book, and I was sick at the time, to be fair, but I read it in probably about a day and a half, which is pretty quick. So going into, and what I really liked about this especially, the book especially, was that I'm sure when people go into this movie, I'm sure they're going in as cynics and saying like, oh, I've already seen the shit. Where it's like, you know, oh, Hollywood is, you know, did all this bad shit and now they're trying to cash in on it. And it's like, I just feel like there was going to be no pleasing people with this. It was either going to be, oh, Hollywood's cashing in on it, and oh, they're hypocrites trying to say, oh, look at the bad stuff when it was us. But then, you know, all these same people, if this movie were never made, those same people would be saying, oh, Hollywood doesn't have the balls to make this movie. And it was just never... People are just going to say the contrary to this movie regardless. So looking at it from the book's perspective, I did like that the book felt like just sort of straight journalism, where it wasn't like it didn't feel like anything was exaggerated. It didn't feel like it was intentionally trying to get a specific reaction. It was just literally saying, by witness account, this is what happened, and that's it, and that's all it says. And yeah, and I feel like I've seen or heard complaints saying that this movie's kind of generic as far as journalism movies go. When you look at stuff like, you know, Spotlight and The Post, and I guess you could say like there are like Dark Waters and The Report in there and stuff like that. And then go back to the classic ones like All the President's Men and stuff like that. But the thing is like there's a reason this is basically a genre in itself. Where it's like, I feel like you could watch Spotlight or The Post and say, oh, it's just exactly like All the President's Men. It's just another version of that, just with a different story. But yeah, I think the reason I especially take to this is, number one, I like how it's not like... It doesn't feel like everything is a knockoff of anything. Like, it's just straightforward using names. Like, everything is Weinstein, everything is Miramax specifically, everything is Ashley Judd and Gwyneth Paltrow and everybody involved. Or some of the people involved. Mara Sorvino never comes up, and a few others, as far as I remember. But we get the basics of what is out there, is that people would recognize throughout. And that's the thing that I was really into also, was the fact that maybe I would take to this as much, if not more, than I would movies like Spotlight or, you know, The Post or All the President's Men, is the fact that this is stuff that I've been knee-deep in my entire life. Where it's like, not only was I following the Weinstein story beat by beat as it was happening, but like I said, when you're watching a story where they're just throwing around, like, you know, names like Miramax and Weinstein and stuff like that, names and titles I've been familiar with forever and know exactly what they are and what their purpose was and what their job was, where it felt like I was very much more absorbed by what was the subject matter of the story itself, or the setting, I guess I should say. And that in itself, I feel like, was making me even more engrossed in it than I would be another, and why I read the book in like a day and a half, because it was just that riveting to me to see all this stuff amidst this movie world that I've always known. So that makes a big difference. Rose McGowan was obviously a big name I didn't mention. But yeah, talking about that also, and talking about how they're just straight up using the names, and it's not like some knockoff Weinstein name or some knockoff Miramax name or whatever. That it's all exactly everything here. Um, the way they went about bringing some of these victims into it, like the high profile ones, like Ashley Judd actually playing herself, which is amazing, and then the way like they have, because I was wondering how they were gonna do this. So they have an actress playing Rose McGowan who's only a voice on the phone, and then they have an especially interesting workaround with Gwyneth Paltrow, where it's like they set it up like they're about to meet her, and then they just kind of cut around it, where it's like they go to her house and they sit by her pool and they're waiting for her to show up, and then it just cuts to them in the car after the meeting talking about what was said, and it's like it's a way where it's like the reason I like the using the names and using, being straightforward about what's going on here and who's being talked about is that it can be distracting when you're clearly going around something. Where it's like when people complain about product placement, and it's like instead of using, the actual product, it's just like some knockoff name. And it's like, I feel like even though people complain about product placement, I feel like the knockoff stuff it's more distracting when it's there, because it's not only are you acknowledging that it's there, you're acknowledging that it's a knockoff and that it's not the actual name and that it's a workaround. So to actually go about this way, I don't think the Paltrow stuff especially, I felt like they worked around in a nice way where, yeah, it might be a bit distracting where you can see them cutting around her actually being in it physically, but it felt like we got all the information that we needed without her being there. And the fact that they can put all this stuff in with the stuff like using the actual recordings. There's that recording of Weinstein and the woman in the hallway that's like real, and which is probably the most chilling thing in it because we're getting the real thing. And that's another thing also that people throw at movies like this, where it's like, why not just make a documentary, because that's going to be what's more harrowing than the real thing. How are you going to reach that with, just actresses playing parts, obviously Ashley Judd aside. But I feel like this one is so straightforward about itself and doesn't, because I was trying to remember changes they might have made to be more theatrical or whatever from the book to the movie, and I can't really think of them. I can think of stuff that was just kind of left out entirely. Like I find it very interesting that, as far as I remember, I don't think Bob Weinstein is ever mentioned in the movie at all, which is kind of odd. That's like when they talk about in the book, especially about a moment where Weinstein like slapped him in front of like in a board meeting with a lot of important people there, and how this was like this big sort of turning point for Bob Weinstein to kind of turn against him. It did feel like there was some stuff in there that was left out for that. That could have gone in those directions, but the fact that it's also pretty victim focused, I feel like is pretty big, because we do have a lot of moments here that I really like where they'll do an interview and then they'll leave, as you would expect in a journalism movie, and then every time they do that, the person they've just interviewed, it's like we kind of linger on them for a little while once the interview's over, and to kind of see how they react. Like, they might either make a call, or they might look really exasperated or broken, or they might look worried, or whatever it might be, and like how it hangs on just for just a little bit on those people after all this has happened were moments that I really liked. Some of them feel kind of big, some of them feel kind of small. I really like that stuff. And then the way Laura Madden is handled, who is played by Jennifer Ely here, and I had talked a lot in our awards videos about how I was expecting a big, great performance from Samantha Morton, and that's exactly what we get, based on the book. Where Samantha Morton gets her one big scene, and it's incredible. But somehow it had not occurred to me that Jennifer Ely would have just as powerful of a presence here, because Madden was going through so much. Madden's character in general is just devastating all over. Just everything about this character is heart-shattering. And the way Jennifer Ely plays that's so real. There's the moment we were talking about, the moment where they linger for a while, and we see people like after the interviews, and there's this moment, this unforgettable moment, where after Madden has had like her first meeting, we see her with her daughters, and and they're just sitting at the table, and it's just completely devastating. Like, really heartbreaking and powerful. And this is like one of the characters that you really feel for throughout the movie itself, with just everything, like everything seems to be piling on for this woman, and everything plays out like it did in the book. Like, everything is real as far as what's happening here, and it's, yeah. So that's another of the really standout performances that I would love to see get, a lot of attention at least. Um, but yeah, Samantha Morton as well, and this is the great thing about these movies like this, where it's the kind of thing where you go from interview to interview and you're kind of gathering information, that it really gives the chance for actors to have these really big kind of scene-stealing moments with just one scene, or sometimes two scenes. Zach Grenier is in this and is absolutely fantastic. But this Morton scene is just one scene, and she's essentially... It's almost like when you look at these and you're looking at like these investigation movies and stuff like that, you're always waiting for the Donald Sutherland and JFK scene, where there's that one person that's just got like the mother load, and they've got the really big scene in the middle, and that's essentially what Samantha Morton gets here. And there's I'm sure this woman will be mortified for me to say this, but she remains anonymous because I don't know this person. But I feel like it's a perfect testament to Morton's performance. The woman that was sitting in front of me in the theater, the Samantha Morton scene was happening, and it's like, oh, here's Samantha Morton. I know this scene's going to be big. This is going to be like one of the money scenes of the movie. And the Samantha Morton scene's going, and it's great. We're getting a lot of information, and she's super powerful. And the woman in front of me unreclines her seat. And I think, is this woman leaving right now? During the Samantha Morton scene? And the woman kind of starts to lean forward, and it's like, this woman wants to leave for some reason. And then I realize the Samantha Morton scene ends, and then this woman gets up and is clearly doing the bathroom run. And then that's when it occurred to me, this woman in front of me was risking her bladder to make sure she saw every bit of the Samantha Morton scene. That is how gripping the Samantha Morton scene is this woman was not going to miss a second of it, when she clearly really had to leave in that particular moment. And it's like, that just in itself, I feel like, solidifies the power that Samantha Morton brought to this one scene, and how riveting this one scene is. I haven't even mentioned our leads. Zoe Kazan and Carey Mulligan. And yeah, what I like about this especially is kind of dividing them, kind of like putting them in their corners, but then also seeing them together. And it's like, the fact that they work just as well, because it's like, when they have the scenes where they're apart, their chemistry is good enough to where you would think, oh, the movie's going to be at its strongest when they're together, so it's not as good unless they're together. But no, they handle their individual scenes so well, that it's working when they're together, and it's working when they're doing their own investigating. There was one scene where I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that, and it was when they go to someone's door and they say, hey, we heard you worked for Harvey Weinstein, we'd like to interview you, and they get the door shut in their face. And it's clear this is a terrified woman, this is a traumatized woman, who doesn't want to go down this path again, ever. So clearly something awful happened. And their response is to, like, make a joke, and to say, like, oh, I guess she's not going to go on the record, or something like that. And it was like, oh, that's kind of... Do you really want to joke about that? What this woman's probably gone through? Then again, it is amidst, like, a montage of doors getting slammed in their face, and getting hung up on, and stuff like that. And it did kind of start to feel like this real thing of, if you were to eventually get to that point, and you were to have enough doors slammed in your face, enough phones hung up on you, that you might get to the point of, like, exasperated gallows humor. And so it was like, at the start it was like, I don't know how I feel about that, but I guess it makes sense as it goes. It still feels pretty insensitive, but I can get it probably from that perspective. And to kind of show that that's, like, them basically at the end of their rope of, we're not getting anything, and, like, what else can we do? We're reaching dead end after dead end. How are we going to get this off the ground? So, that in itself probably works for that. But yeah, as far as their performances go, the way it shows them as individuals with, like, you know, their husbands and their families and stuff like that. And I like the fact that their families don't feel like they're necessarily just there. Like, they're not there a lot, and they're not super crucial. But the fact that we have, I want to say it's Zoe Kazan's husband, seems to be going through his own troubles, like his father and stuff like that. His father being in, like, failing health and stuff like that. And it gives you just enough to show how much it's piling on for both of these women, what's going on not just the case itself, but like all these other things. And Mulligan's just had a baby, and she's going through the whole postpartum thing and all that, and you can feel like how much is piling up. And we see the dangers, of these kind of investigations with Mulligan in the opening scenes, when she starts getting threatened, because she was, investigating Trump and all that. So, going on as far as the Weinstein stuff itself and how they handled that, talking about the workarounds, where they do. I was talking to Owen about the movie after we had seen it, and we called to talk about it, and he had made the reference of Weinstein in this movie is essentially handled like George Steinbrenner in Seinfeld, where we kind of see him from behind only, but somebody else is doing his voice. Somebody doing his voice pretty well. And it's like that's another thing where it might feel like it's doing a workaround so they don't actually have to have him have scenes or anything like that for whatever reason. But it also feels like it's not giving him the dignity of showing his face in the movie, where it almost feels like a fuck you to him that he's essentially not in the movie. That he's like barely like his obviously his presence is always here because we're amidst his aftermath. But it's like to almost make actually him being physically in the movie an afterthought. It feels like a very deliberate choice and not just a do we use his likeness or do we not kind of thing. Like, who do you get to play him and stuff like that. It feels pretty deliberate about how they handled that. So I can definitely see why they would go that direction. Patricia Clarkson and Andre Braugher are also here as the people kind of in charge of the whole thing. And I like them especially. For a while, they just kind of seem in the background where it's almost like, well, you got Patricia Clarkson and Andre Braugher for parts that don't really seem that crucial. But then as it goes on, especially in this sort of second half, when they're really behind everything, we really get to see how in control they are and how they're overseeing everything and making the choices. I love the Andre Braugher scenes on the phone, especially with Weinstein, where he's basically just, hanging up on him and saying, like, because he's somebody that's been through Weinstein before and he's over it. I love that. And Andre Braugher can play that so perfectly. So honestly, at the end of the day, we know where this is going, and it's like how they portray it and how they do it dramatically, despite the fact that we know where it goes. And I thought it was excellent, quite honestly. There's moments where they're just lingering on empty rooms with audio playing that's very, very powerful. So when we have the scenes with the lawyers and going back and forth, it might seem, redundant and back and forth and all that, but like I said, when you like kind of know the progression and it's something you've really been knee deep in already, there's really something here. And it's like, I don't know if it's going to work as much because people that have watched, like Spotlight and All the President's Men and stuff like that might just see it as like a sort of lower tier kind of thing there. But like I said, it's probably just the setting of the movie world that would have somebody like me much more engrossed in it than those other movies that are also amazing. But it's like this one especially. And like I said, the power behind the individual scenes and the moments and the moments with the victims themselves and seeing them be able to overcome this in the best way that they can. Because you always do get that vibe that it's tragically permanent damage in a sense in one way or another, but that there's still like a bit of a triumphant feeling at the end of it, that you do feel that very much. So I do think that this is probably one of the best of the year for me. And I'm very, very pleased with how it turned out. Even though it's just essentially the book on screen, but in moments like this where it's actually true stories, I feel like the more accurate probably the better. Like I said, I don't really think there's anything here that I didn't see or remember from the book, or that they exaggerated or anything like that. Like I said, just used as a way to try to get a reaction or anything like that. It just feels pretty straightforward about itself, and I feel like that's the best way to do something like this. So, yeah, I thought they really succeeded with this, in my opinion. So, let's go on now to the menu. We're going to finish this up with the menu. And what's really great about the menu is that I don't know what the hell I can talk about. Because I don't want to spoil anything. The movie's too good to want to spoil anything. The movie's too much of an experience to want to say too much about it. Because when I was going into this, I only had a very, very, very vague idea of what it might be, and it turned out to not even be that. So, needless to say, throughout this whole movie, I was thinking, I don't know what is happening or where this is going, but I want to know, and I am ready to sit here until we get there to see what happens. And that's really fun and really exciting. And this is the thing also, is this movie is so gloriously weird and unique that I feel like it especially stands out now, because even though I liked the last two movies we talked about, I loved one of them. We are in a moment here in November of 2022 where there's all the superhero movies, you know, the really, really big movies. We got Avatar coming and stuff like that. This stuff where, yeah, there might be superhero fatigue, but there's still something that's, you know, great about seeing big, gigantic movies in a theater. Then you come over here, and because we're in November, we're also, like, right in award season, so there's a lot of stuff coming out. Like I said, I love She Said, but movies like this coming out around this time of year are just kind of in the Oscar machine. So it's like, yeah, we're watching this because I want to see this, but also, you know, because it's award season, it could get these nominations or those nominations or whatever. And those kind of, until the award season's over, those movies are kind of stuck in that machine. So we've got the Oscar machine over here, and the big budget superhero machine over here. And at this particular point, you're just, even if you like the movies on both of these sides, you're also just dying for a movie like The Menu to come along. Something just so fucked up and insane and just completely out of left field. It's like such an antidote to all of this. Regardless of how much you like or love the stuff on the side, sometimes we just need something that's just its own thing that just stands here and says, "Look how fucking nuts we are." And not in like a show-offy way, not in a "we're trying too hard" kind of way. This movie is very organic in how its craziness kind of comes out. Because it feels very calm for a long time, and then the creepiness and the craziness and just the total fucked up nature of it just kind of creeps up on you throughout the hour 40 something that it is. And it's great. I do think it's, I will say this right away because I sound super, super enthusiastic, and I am super, super enthusiastic about this movie. I don't think that it reaches greatness. It's always on the cusp of greatness. It's always right there. It is almost at greatness, and then it kind of brings itself down a little bit. And it's like, oh, and you're just kind of waiting for that feeling. You know that feeling. It's hard to describe, but you all know it if you've seen enough movies where you know how you feel when you watch a good movie, and then you know how you feel when you're watching a good movie that goes over that last hump to get to a great movie. And you get that feeling where it's like, oh, now this is something else. Now this is a different feeling. A better feeling. And it's always almost at that point, and then it just always kind of comes back. But still, I said this about Everything Everywhere All at Once also, where obviously everybody's in love with Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I'm not. But I just appreciated it simply for existing. Like, I appreciate that there's movies like that are just, this is just our thing. And it's just, and you just go into that. And it's, like I said, especially when you've got a lot of machines doing their work in the industry, when movies like this are just kind of dropped on you suddenly, it's this really, really refreshing feeling, and that's what I appreciate the most about this movie. Even if it doesn't reach that greatness factor, I'm still very, very pleased with the experience of having watched this. It was it was very, very satisfying just in general. And now it's like, just like I said, without really saying much of anything about it, just the way it starts off, there's just something so ominous. I think especially about just the isolation of it, where our characters are taken to this restaurant that you have to take like a ferry to get to, or a boat to get to. and then you're dropped off and the boat leaves. And there's even a moment, this very familiar moment, where it's Anya Taylor-Joy is watching the boat leave, and we do get this sense of like she as a character in particular, like everybody else here is pretty comfortable. They feel like they know what they're in for, and this is what they're here for, and everything's great. And she's the one that kind of feels a bit isolated, and it's like watching her watch the boat leave. You get the sense of exactly what she's feeling, of this sort of being left behind by like one point of safety, like one sort of, you know, lifesavers just floating away. And then going into this place, this very strange and bizarre place this restaurant that feels like this isolated community in itself, even though there's only like 3 buildings here. Um, and it's that setup in itself, and the fact that these people are coming here to have this very high-end meal from this potentially insane chef played by Ralph Fiennes. And this is another case also where you feel like you get a sense of a lot of things just in the casting. Where it's like with Fiennes as the chef, you kind of get this idea that it's very possible this is an unhinged person, but also an extremely well-respected person. I can't honestly think of a better casting choice for this role. And it's the way that he's presenting his food, where he has this sort of repressed joy when he's talking about the food itself. Where it's like one of the only times we see him like sort of genuinely smiling, but he's still kind of keeping everything kind of down here. But then, anytime he's not talking about the food or presenting the food, there's definitely this intensity and this unnerving quality to him. And you feel like that if you make eye contact with him, you'll die on the spot or something. Like something feels very sinister underlying, but you also have the feeling you have no idea what that is. You just know that it's there. And that feeling being throughout the whole entire movie is... Yeah, and honestly, what's great about Fiennes' performance also is we actually reach a point, and it may not even be the halfway point, it might even be before that, where when it comes to the repressed joy in talking about food, and then the intensity of this could be a potentially dangerous person, after a while it kind of gets to the point where you at first you can separate it from, well, as long as he's talking about food, he seems okay, relatively. But then when he's not, we kind of get this. After a while, it doesn't feel like there's any telling what's going to make which version of Fiennes is going to react to whatever's happening, whatever's being said. It's just, it gets to the point where anytime he's on screen, it could be either one. And he's just a wild card eventually. And that's really exciting. And it doesn't help that Hong Chow is here, who takes him around the island and shows them everything, but then is also constantly lurking around the dining room as they're eating. And she's got this constant psychotic smile on her face, where it's clear that this person doesn't really smile out of joy. It almost feels like it's their job to smile, but it's another case like Fiennes, where it's like, you don't even know if this person is sane or dangerous or whatever, but just everything feels off. Like, it starts off like, oh, it could be this exciting thing, but you get that sense through the other characters. But I feel like Anya Taylor-Joy is pretty much where we are, where we can take it in, but we're kind of immediately suspicious of everything. Because there's a constant ominous feel, but you also get the sense this could just be a really cool place to eat at some point. And some of the customers, like Reed Birney and Judith Light, have even been here before, which is established. But going into it also, it is an interesting way to see it as far as art being viewed, I guess. Because, like, if you're a creative person, you might actually... not that you would want to be completely, but you get a sliver of where Fiennes' character is. Because it's like you see the meticulous nature of everything he's put together here, and how the whole thing is about the presentation of this gigantic meal, and how everything is so thought out and so put together, that you'll have people come in, like Jana McTeer, as a food critic, will come in, and just... she'll praise things, but she'll also rip things apart equally. To where something sounds like it's positive, but it feels more like it's negative. And just that kind of feeling in general, to just work so hard and work your entire life to do something so small so perfectly, and have somebody come in and just say, it's okay, I guess. And just how, like, soul crushing that could be, and how potentially dark place that could potentially take you, depending on how passionate you are about this particular thing. Um, and there's like unimpressed rich kids there, where it's like, oh yeah, my cook at home makes this at the same quality and stuff like that. And you can see where it's kind of looking at, like, you could say it's probably a bit played out to look at rich people, the way that a lot of movies have been lately. To my even though I haven't seen it, to my understanding, Triangle of Sadness touches on this also, where it's like we're kind of in this fuck rich people phase of movies, where it's like we're doing a satire of that particular thing, and I don't know that we're really saying too much about it. Like, it's pretty on the nose about it throughout. But like I said, there's things in there that are certainly relatable, and there's a certain frustration and irritability about a certain type of people that can come through. And the fact that it doesn't even... The best satire also is where it's like... It's... You could say it's exaggerated, but it's kind of not really... Where it feels exaggerated, but it's not, actually, is where the best satire will be. And actually, I do feel like they capture that pretty well with the Janet McTeer character, that's the food critic, and the unimpressed rich kids, and even Ree Burney and Judith Light, who just kind of, like, are here feeling like they're essentially going through the motions. And how they're doing this extremely privileged thing just again. I think Fine says later they've done it 11... They've been here 11 times. And it's this whole thing where it's like it has to be this really... It's very exclusive experience. And then another person in this cast, which might be... It's a very, very standout cast in general. Like, John Leguizamo's in here. To my understanding, he said in an interview that he was kind of basing his character of this kind of on the cusp of being forgotten movie star on Steven Seagal. And if you haven't heard his executive decision story when he worked with Steven Seagal, which I feel like I've heard him tell at least 10 times, and every time it's worth hearing. And it's... because he's such a great storyteller. And so to him bringing that here also, there's this just vanity everywhere. There's just vanity all throughout this dining room. And then you have Anya Taylor-Joy, and you have Nicholas Hoult. And Nicholas Hoult was somebody that was really standing out to me, because I feel like after The Favorite, I will watch Nicholas Hoult in anything, doing anything. And that was probably Fury Road for a lot of people, or maybe even About a Boy for people, but it was The Favorite where it was really like, I feel like he can do pretty much anything. And so this guy that he plays here, that I could not take my eyes off of, because he's, despite everything that's happening here, he seems so nonchalant throughout it, and so unbothered by the things that progress in this movie. There was a point in time where Nicholas Hoult is just sitting at the table eating, and it crossed my mind, of all the crazy shit that has happened in this movie and that I feel like we're headed towards in this movie, this guy is the craziest person in the room. And he's so unbothered by everything, and it's like, this guy, I feel like this guy is low-key psychotic. And you get that vibe throughout the character, and I do feel like there is a moment, there's a development in the movie that I feel like kind of extinguishes that a little bit, unfortunately. And that's... I wasn't too enthused about that, because I just loved the idea of this character feeling psychotic because he's so unbothered. And because he's so focused on the wrong things. But if the character had just stayed that would have been amazing. But the movie does eventually have developments, some of which feel kind of convoluted. But still, there's always moments that do keep it alive. What I thought was especially interesting about this movie was how, yeah, it's like at this sort of... It's got a dark comedy aspect throughout it, for sure. But I love the fact that as it's ramping up its craziness in its second half, when it should be like, oh, it starts off, light, and then gets darker and darker as it goes, while that does happen, it does feel like there wasn't a lot of humor in the first half, or there was just sort of light humor or whatever. But it was in the second half when the movie was getting significantly darker and crazier that the humor started to become laugh out loud moments, like really genuine, hilarious moments, and intentionally. And that's I was very surprised. Every time I laughed out loud, I was surprised that I was. And that's a really great feeling, also. But then, like, as it goes on in the movie, it just kind of feels like this very real portrayal of hopelessness. That was a feeling I wasn't expecting coming into this movie, was just the general hopelessness of it. Like I said, I start to feel like I'm saying too much at this point, which I don't want to do. So I should probably just stop right about here. Because I feel like my general thoughts are kind of out there, where it's like, there's so much about this movie I'm so enthusiastic about, but at the end of the day, yeah, some of the developments do feel convoluted, and it does feel like it's always just barely not getting over that step to get to, like, total greatness, and that feeling of that feeling that you know when you've gone from good to great. Never quite gets there, but it's so painfully close. But like I said, I just really appreciate this movie, and I'm really interested to see it again too. Now that we know the developments, just to see if it's as intriguing, because it's one of those ones that the first experience feels really hinged on. Oh my god, I have no idea where this is going. So I'm really curious, once you know where it's going, how it feels. It could be better, or it could be not as powerful, or it could be, somewhere about the same, but feel like a slightly different experience. It'll be interesting to see, but I'll be happy to find out. So that's where I think we can leave this. We're all over the damn place. I don't know what's next, but something will be. So until whatever that thing is, that's it.